Welcome to the latest episode of the Cyber Trusted Tech Talk podcast. I'm your host, Jake Adshead, heading up the cyber function at Maxwell Bond and co-host at Trusted Tech Talks. This week, I'm joined by Naveed Islam, CISO at Dojo, and Oscar Neill, CISO at Beeks. Today, we will be discussing the first 90 days as a CISO. Thanks to you both for joining me today. Obviously, today we're going to be chatting around, it's going to be focusing obviously on the first 90 days as a CISO, but there's so much more to it. I think you guys both know that nothing can get done in 90 days. But really what we're going to start with is very much around the pre-90 days, making sure you're getting into the right role. The first 90 days, what the board want to see, and not just what the board want to see, but very much what everybody across the business needs to see and how you can get them on your side, really. So yeah, there's a lot of discussion to be had, and I know it'll be a really, really interesting one with you both. So I think first and foremost, can I get you guys to introduce yourselves? And I'll start with you, Naveed.
Thanks, Jake. So Naveed Islam, I am the Chief Security Officer at Dojo. We are a payments acquirer. We mostly focused on small to medium enterprises. We provide them the capability of taking card payments in whichever way possible, face-to-face, remote, phones, etc., etc. Previous to here, so I've been here 3 years now. Previous to here, I was at Currys, I think one of the largest electronic retailers in the UK, if not Europe. And the previous to that was all consultancy. So six odd years in-house roles and 15 odd years before that in consultancy.
Mad. Yeah, it seems to be a lot of the case. A lot of people go from, and people more enjoy it, I suppose, as well at the end client. I think, getting actually in the thick of it rather than different pots and pans and not seeing seeing things through. But yeah, cheers, Naveed. How about you, Oscar?
Yeah, hi, I'm Oscar Neill. I'm the CISO at Beeks Group. I've been in role for about a year now. Beeks are a name-listed organisation on the London Stock Exchange. We provide ultra-low latency compute, connectivity and analytics to global capital markets organisations. So we're in 30 data centres globally across Americas, EMEA and APAC. My responsibilities include security operations, engineering, technology risk management, data protection and compliance. So kind of lots of different areas. Previous to that, I've held head of cyber role, head of infosec at another smaller service provider, building out their managed security services, kind of MDR type services, managed vulnerability scanning. And then kind of previous to that, working in a large smart metering organization. So I've kind of spent the last 12 years in tech and cyber.
Well, yeah, thanks, Oscar. I think what's great about you both is obviously you're coming from different sort of walks of life. Obviously, both in CISO roles now, obviously, but different industries. You know, you've seen different things and ways of working, and so I think that leads me on to, the first sort of question, the first point, very much around, obviously you've both seen it and done there at the top of the food chain in terms of CISO roles. What have you, in terms of the advice around getting into those roles? What is it to ensure that you are getting into the right CISO role first and foremost? What's your sort of tips and advice, and what have you seen from, before you getting the roles at, Currys or Beeks? What have you seen to make sure that you land and get the right position?
Look, there's an element of, as much as I don't like saying, there's an element of luck involved.
Yeah.
The right place, the right opportunity type things. I guess my advice to any aspiring CISOs, as people new into roles or looking to move into CISO roles, is very much do your due diligence. Understand what the difference between a head of InfoSec versus what a CISO is going to be. I'm still finding the industry is not quite mature enough, so quite a lot of companies still call head of InfoSec type roles a CISO role. So it's understanding that. It's understanding, for me, for example, firstly, understanding your personal aspirations, what you want to achieve. And then any opportunities that come up, understanding and say what's been asked. I like doing due diligence on organizations, right? Whenever someone approaches me, I try to understand who the organization is, how, if they're listed, for example, I'll read the company reports, try to understand the board members, where they basically come from, what their backgrounds are, just to understand, get a feel for the maturity maybe. But a lot of it, as I said, it comes down to, so when I joined Dojo 3 years ago, they actually didn't know what they called it a CISO role because the regulator called it a CISO role. So the FCA called it a CISO role. They just knew they wanted someone to come in and create a security function and do the right things. But that was it. That was as broad as it was. So it could have been called a head of InfoSec at that point. As I said, it was the right place, right time for me, that the regulator basically has a industry title. They basically wanted to do it. Hence, that's what my role was called. But a lot to do with roles and responsibilities, because you could be called a CISO, you could be called SVP of InfoSec. All comes down to what they expect you to do. Now, as I said, when I joined this startup, there were some expectations. I'm going to be hands-on keyboard. I am the ultimate expert in every area of security. So I had engineers asking me minutiae details about encryption, and I had to basically set some expectations. My knowledge, whilst I'm from a tech background, is not as deep as they basically probably expect. So what I'm here to do is basically do the top level strategy, build teams, make sure we have the right capabilities, as opposed to be an expert in every single field. So there's some of the things I've come across in recent times. So it's getting to know, as I said, the business, knowing what you want to do as well, because some people still want to be very hands-on, etc., and then waiting for the right opportunity.
Yeah. How was it for you, Oscar, when going for Beeks, I suppose?
I think what Naveed said makes aligns with me a lot. You need to understand the business and what they're looking for out of that role, because CISO can mean different things to different people, rightly or wrongly. The CISO role should be more focused around strategic view, leadership, people management, really focused on the financial aspects as well of security, and really you should be empowering your team to deliver for you. As you said, you can't be an expert in all these different areas. You're kind of relying on your team. But yeah, it can mean different things to different people. Not all organizations are ready for a CISO as well. It's kind of an important point. It's important to understand what you're looking for as an organization, what you're looking to achieve. If you're looking for someone to kind of implement an EDR tool, and you're looking for a CISO to do that, then it's probably not the right person that you're kind of looking for. So
I think the key thing there is, and it's like with any type of role, isn't it, that it's a two-way street, isn't it? You're going for an interview, but from your side of the coin, let's say, you need to be digging deep in terms of what they want and what they need, and really hope that what they say in the interview process and throughout the interview process aligns to what you want, but then also aligns once you're in the role as well, which unfortunately sometimes isn't the case. That, and again, that goes back to your point, Naveed, around the luck situation and making sure that what's been said throughout the interview is the right thing, and they are going to fulfill that. The one thing I wanted to mention was, and this is, again, it can very much keep on going, and there's a lot of talk around at the moment, but I suppose finding out the reporting structure and that sort of remit, and where that should report, where the CISO should report into. And I don't want to delve too much into that, but I know that's a big one for you guys when you are looking at a role, or your next role, or your next challenge. And for any aspiring CISO, or anybody that's in a CISO position looking for the next challenge at the moment as well, is that sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's challenges with different areas. We could have a whole session on reporting lines, I think, because there's these individuals, like your typical CTOs and CIOs, have other aspirations and strategic views of potentially keeping systems available, and focusing on moving the organization forward from a technology point of view. And that can sometimes clash with kind of security objectives or what you're trying to achieve. Not all the time, but it can do. So there's definitely there's definitely an important factor to when you're considering a role. Where does it report into? How do those individuals align with what you're trying to achieve as an individual? I mean, I wouldn't step into a role unless it aligned with what you were trying to get out of it. Otherwise, you're just going to be hitting your head against a brick wall.
Yeah, absolutely. What Oscar said, in fact, something else you said, Oscar, in the previous part was, some organizations are not ready for a CISO, but they know they need someone. As I said, the title is the title. However, you don't have to be a CISO to be the top person in security for that organization. Some companies are not ready. They don't understand. So the natural place historically has been CIO, CTO. For me, there is no hard fast rule. There is no. I have personal preferences, right? So I report in chief risk officer. It's a better alignment for myself, and how I want to run security in an organization. Previously reported to CTO, that also actually worked because the individual. It was more to do with the individual rather than all CTOs are basically made from the same mold.
Yeah.
As part of the interview process, one of the things I like to do is get to know other exec members, or basically have a chat with them as part of the interview process, because reporting line is one thing, but then what's the expectations across the board, right? Because as I said, reporting lines sometimes can literally be people management. And the good CTOs, CIOs I've worked for kind of just manage you as a person, kind of, I'm not a security expert, that's your boy. And we will basically act as peers. The reporting line exists because they exist, right? Other CTOs, CIOs I've come across in my consulting days have been quite, to Oscar's point, all about availability, all about projects being on time, etc. Security, we can do later, right? It's fine. I'm willing to accept the risk, etc. So it just depends on the individual as well.
Yeah.
But my personal preference has been for a very long time, not in the technology stack, because then security is just seen as a subset. It just becomes a infrastructure security role as opposed to a truly information security role across the business. Personally, I found there's a wider reach if you sit within a COO, CRO, or general counsel type roles, CFO I've done in the past, as opposed to CIO, because there is a very much, as I said, historic connotation what the CIO function does. And I think Oscar hit nail on the head: system availability, new initiatives, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one that we could probably keep on going and going. And yeah, a lot of rights and yeah, not rights, like you said, personal preferences, I think, is probably the best way to go about it. But I think it's comes down to the maturity of the business, doesn't it? And fully really understanding what they need and what they don't need, sort of thing. So but yeah, I think that's definitely one to basically put aside and definitely chat again. But when you, I suppose, going on to the next, side of things, and when you're in that role and when you're in your CISO role, what does the first 90 days look for you? What's the main areas that you would be focusing on? I know it will differ from business to business, but what's the core for you both?
Personally, I like to kind of have a look at where the biggest risks are to the business. So what are their core revenue streams, and what is kind of the biggest risk to those? Do they have a mature risk management framework in place? Because that should drive your decisions really within the business. You should be looking to mitigate, if relevant, for any kind of risks that are there to the revenue stream really. So you really want to identify those stakeholders, the revenue streams, build those early kind of really strong relationships, because it will help you down the line, not only in the boardroom but outside as well. There's a lot to be said for building these personal relationships with other executives and individuals that have influence within the organization. You're almost socially engineering them to an extent, but you need to have those relationships to have those clear communication channels, or you'll really struggle. And a lot of your initial strategy should be based around those key business objectives when speaking to these individuals, and how you align security to that. I think that's super important. But it'd be good to get your view on that, Naveed.
Absolutely, Oscar. I think you hit the nail on the head, right? And the number one thing I like to do is understand how the business makes money. Because above everything else, most businesses, if not all businesses, exist for one thing, right? Making money. So you understand what is those key things that, as I said, working at Curry's, stored the tills. The tills had to be online all the time. The website had to be running. At Dojo, our payment gateway has to be running at all times to make sure the payments are being processed. Understanding that in the first instance. The stakeholder management, absolutely. So execs, but also, as you said, Oscar, some of the key players. Because it's not all about the execs. It's about essentially I'll call it middle management, inverted commas, but essentially some of the people who are closer to the action. Almost getting their sense of what they think the risks are, what security means. Because what I often find is, initially when you go in, there's a massive disconnect. They think this is what security is versus what, as a new CISO, you might want to do. And the other thing, there's amongst other things, the third thing I like to do is just understand business processes. How do things actually work? How does procurement work? If there's change management, how does that work? How does contract reviews work? This process of just doing security, not the actual nitty-gritty of security, but how do you basically start building things up? How do you do recruitment in an organization? Et cetera, et cetera. I'd like to understand that. And then in the first 90 days, I like doing some of the risk identification pieces. For example, a couple of things I've done in my last 2 roles, which is mapping out the external perimeter as the first thing. What does our perimeter look like? What could the attackers potentially see, right? Little things that don't have a massive impact, because I don't like doing massive changes in the first 90 days unless I'm aware of a massive glaring hole. So you're doing enough to basically be able to suss out the risk, as Oscar said, but while trying to truly understand how the business is working. I said you truly understand. You don't understand the first 90 days, but you're on the stepping stone to understand how the business works, and also the business processes are going to work going forward.
Yeah.
I've come from quite a rigid organization. Encouraged, basically mature organization, had very specific processes. To Dojo had no processes 3 years ago when we were in our startup phase. And just understanding that and adjusting for it takes a while. So those are the type of things I like to do in the first 90 days. And I'm sure we'll come on to this, but basically aligning ourselves to a framework, so that when you start communicating what you're going to do, that it's not just you blagging it, going, trust me, I know, is something that you kind of go like, for example, I use in this cybersecurity framework.
Yeah.
That it's a recognized thing that we're going to do so that we can benchmark ourselves against others rather than me winging it. So it's little things like that I like to do, credentialize myself, understand the business, and then start doing some of the risk identification that Oscar talked about.
I was going to ask, so, you know, the first thing obviously you're looking at is where the money's made. So that's something you can do, and that's something, you know, a lot of CISOs and a lot of people anyway, you know, should go into a business, know what the streams are, know what's right, you know, what ticks and what makes them tick.
Yeah.
The next point obviously you made was around getting the board on side and getting the stakeholders on side, not just the board, but getting the stakeholders on side. That's where I think a lot of the challenge is for you guys. In a lot of businesses, a lot of businesses they need you and they know they want you and whatnot. And then a lot of businesses don't. Either way, there's still that challenge. I suppose and you sort of touched on it around the framework side of things, Naveed, but there's probably a lot more to it. But how do you get that, I suppose, get them on side? How do you do that, you know, the best way? How have you experienced it? What have you guys done on that front to really sort of change maybe their minds, or got them on your side?
Look, it's not going to be the perfect security answer, but it was a good business answer at that point. So when I joined Dojo about 3 years ago, there was a migration happening from, we're cloud native majority, but we had some on-premise back then that had to be moved to cloud. And there was, actually, we were coming out of COVID. So the background was coming out of COVID / the lockdown specifically. And we expected the hospitality industry to start booming again, because people were going to visit cafes, bars, etc., restaurants, even though within this bubble. So we expected that, and we needed to move into a cloud environment for better stability and resilience. As part of that, when I joined, there's something I looked at. We did a quick pen test on it, and there were some vulnerabilities, right? And that, to your point, how do you get them on side? Timing-wise, it worked for me, because again, it was basically a risk-based decision. Myself and the CTO had a discussion. He said, Naveed, this is a pressing business requirement. We don't do this, we're ultimately not going to make any money. Is the risk that high that you want to stop this happening, or is it something that we can fix after go live, just because it's not that big a risk, right? So I almost took a step back, kind of go, on the face of it, vulnerability things are not that great, but if you look at the wider context of it, it's not the end of the world if we go live. I said, I'm not suggesting you accept all risks initially. In this context, the risk wasn't that high. That just bought me some brownie points with the CTO and our owners, because we went live with this new cloud environment. Our business basically was able to take double, triple, 4 times the amount of card transactions coming through, etc. So that just stood me in good stead. Yeah. Some of it is coming back to the point. I understood how the money piece worked, the revenue worked, and allowing this thing to happen would just mean we continue doing it. Now, don't get me wrong. If it was an absolute red flag, I would have had to basically step in and do some negotiations. In this instance, I just took a bigger picture when, yes, while the pen test isn't the greatest, the environment is not open to the internet, etc., we can live with it. And it's almost showing that consideration for the business. It's not security first. It's security is part of the risk management consideration. Yeah. And look, we didn't have a mature, so Oscar talked about it, we didn't have a mature risk management process. Essentially, it was just 2 people talking to each other and kind of going, very urgent from a business perspective. Is this that urgent from a security perspective? Because if you want to stop it, you can. But I just took the view it wasn't worth stopping it because the business need was far greater. As I said, but that was a very specific example. If the argument's sake, if this stuck something out into the internet with nothing on it, I would have to then step in. But it's just having that conversation and showing that you're not just considering security by itself, you are putting it into the wider business context. And you truly understand what the business is trying to do, as opposed to just go, I don't care what you're trying to do, security first. And that's the attitude which I often find people fail with, because it's not security first. Security is one of the considerations. I don't know about your experience, Oscar.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I think as this, as we CISOs are executives, and we need to think about the business as well. Security is a part of that, but we should focus more on enablement. And what I mean by that is, if the business, for example, needs USB access for something, we don't just lock down USB access because we're nervous about data security risks. There's other ways to achieve that potentially. And it's about understanding why the business wants to do something, to help get there more securely. And then just taking a step back as well to around kind of working with executives and leaders within the organization. You kind of want to align your objectives to kind of what they need as well. So if I think specifically about achieving SOC 2 compliance, for example, it's something that the Beeks have done, and that was around achieving that attestation so that we can then win a potential customer contract. So that also helps the sales team, but then also allowed us to put in these security controls and enhance our maturity at the same time. So we could then get there with enablement, improve our security, and then also help the sales team to convert sales to improve the revenue of the business. So I think there's a lot to be said about really aligning your objectives with what the business are trying to achieve.
Yeah, actually, absolutely. Oscar, you mentioned something which is enablement. I like that word, because a lot of time people kind of go, security is not a blocker, it's an enabler. The thing is, it's sometimes very difficult unless you're in a sales type situation to show how you're bringing in or you're helping the bringing in of revenue, right? And doing the opposite of kind of, if you don't, this bad thing can happen, and then all of these there's a lot of ifs and buts involved, and it takes quite a stretch to get there, right? Yeah. But little things, to your point, that helps sales teams, or allowing a gateway to go, a payment processing thing to go live, that will revenue, just showing that you understand, as I said, what the business is looking to achieve, and doing enough security to enable that without trying to absolutely lock it down. Certification regulators actually help, but at times a hinder, because sometimes people take the regulatory thing and kind of go, this is an absolute. It's never an absolute. It's kind of within the context of the business. So if nothing comes out of this podcast apart from truly understand the business and kind of go, how does that work, and how do we do security for that business? That's my takeaway from it. Because I can do security wherever, right? This is the way I've arrived at. I can lift and shift, I put it anywhere and do security in a bubble, but it won't work. It has to work within the context of whatever business I go into. So I usually have the same structures that I build, but the way they operate are very different to how they operated at Curry's, how they operate at Dojo, and how they may operate in the future, because it's all dictated by the business culture, the business mindset, maturity of the business, and also the people in the business.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, cheers, guys. Do you think there's, when you're all security led, everything's security heavy, but the people sometimes that you're speaking to aren't very security focused. They don't quite maybe understand it. How, you touched on around the frameworks, and this, is that something that you can explain to them in the right way? And let's say you have a specific risk involved, and then you say, look, this is what I'm going to do about it. Does that enable you to do that, or is there any sort of metrics or any KPIs that you sort of utilize and use when you've got a risk and you're going to say you're going to do this and X, Y, Z for that?
I think the maturity frameworks are very useful for us. Like when I did that when I joined the organization, to get a look at where we were at from a maturity point of view, and whether there was any low-hanging fruit in terms of work streams we could go after. But from what I take to the board, I take from a risk perspective in their language, what the risk is, what the kind of inherent impact is, and what kind of controls or what we can do to mitigate that, and the cost of that, and residually what we end up in. Because if you speak to them in that language, they'll understand it. if you start talking about you've got these critical vulnerabilities and remote code execution vulnerabilities, they're not going to have a clue what you're talking about. You need to speak to them in their language.
Yeah. Is that something you face, Naveed? Do you think is that key?
Absolutely. Ultimately, the thing is, the framework, as I said, I mentioned the framework is only to the reason is if you just go in, especially in your first 90 days, because I'm going to do this, sometimes, depending on maturity, someone will kind of go, well, what is it based on? Because again, the risk you can have with someone, especially security, can still be seen as a bit of a black box thing.
Yeah.
Is Naveed just doing things off his own back? Is this going to be repeatable, sustainable, etc., etc.? So the framework, the way I do it, and it's slightly different in each organization. Some are familiar with it. At Currys, the audit committee and the risk committees knew about this. So you can basically have a lot of conversations based on that and refer back to it more often. At Dojo, I don't refer back to it as often. Initially in the 90 days, it was, this is how I'm going to set up my stall. These are almost the top level headings I'm going to go after. But then it very much comes down to what Oscar says, talking their language. Ultimately, what is it that they care about? Which is ultimately, how much risk are we facing? How much does it cost? What would happen if basically, what's the impact? How much does it cost to basically fix it? And how quickly can it be done if we're going to do it? It's those type of things that you need to be able to preempt, answer, probe around, etc., etc. No point talking about vulnerabilities, right? Because 10 vulnerabilities versus 1,000 vulnerabilities, the numbers are almost meaningless because they don't know what it is. Or saying we've had 50 incidents, 16. None of that actually means anything until you kind of go, this basically resulted in this. And hopefully none of them have an impact, but we have this much risk. This is what it's going to cost. And if we don't do it, this is the risk we're going to be exposed to. And very much over the years, I said, not initially in the 90 days, but over the years, I've come around to talking that language. Because initially I made the mistake of highlighting some numbers and I confused the hell out of the execs and our founders. They just looked at the numbers, went, what's the difference between 100 and 1,000 at that point, right? To them, there is no scale that they can use.
That's a good sidestep into KPIs as well, because it's like you need to be able to actually present useful KPIs, and vulnerabilities is a good example. Like, who cares about 100,000 vulnerabilities? What have the team actually fixed? What is actually real risk to the environment? How do you measure those KPIs in a format that's consumable? I mean, you could talk again and debate all different key metrics, but it should all be kind of risk-based and focused on things that they can consume. Talking about, you've got this many vulnerabilities at a specific point in time, they're not going to know what that is, or if it's good or bad or indifferent.
Yeah. Jake, just coming back to something you asked me about the framework. Yeah, so when I started Dojo almost 3 years ago, what I did was in my first, I think, 6 weeks, I went to the execs and our founders and said, this is kind of what I'm going to do. And I aligned it with the framework, I said, just to kind of credentialize it. And the idea there was very much around, these are the things I've seen in the first 6 weeks that I think I can tackle without major disruption. And again, one of the things I also learned is, I know all security people have very much a thing around fixing everything, right? We see a risk, we go, oh my God, we must fix it. But within the first 90 days, no one expects you to basically go in and, unless you absolutely find something that's super duper critical. As I said, someone stuck a payment card database out on the internet, you go, oh my God, what the hell is this? But apart from that, they expect you to do they expect you to learn the business and start chipping away at some stuff without completely rocking the boat. Because I've had numerous comments, which is, then first, you don't actually know how the business is working. You need to understand that before doing anything substantial.
Yeah.
So it's almost, the framework is my almost North Star. This is how I'm going to basically go forward with maturity, self-assessment maturity here. This is where I want to get to, a 3-year plan, etc. But I very much gave a first 90-day thing, right? Here's are the things I'm going to try to do or start in the first 90 days to understand the lay of the land, but also start making small improvements. That at least gives you a short-term target, because otherwise for execs, if you can't go, this is what I'm going to do in a year, there's a whole 12 months of unknown potentially there, right? So I'd like to just chunk it up in the title of this is the first 90 days, which is in the first 90 days, this is what I'm going to do. A lot of business understanding, and then start exploring these under the headings of the framework, whatever that may be.
Yeah, it's funny. Like you said, I don't know where this 90 days has come from, if I'm brutally honest. And that, like, you've just touched on it though, but you do chunk it up and you do say, quarter by quarter.
I think it's a quarter thing.
Yeah.
I think it's literally is a quarter thing, right? Everyone nowadays works from a Q1, Q2, Q3 type perspective. It's just 90 days equates nicely to Q1.
Yeah, exactly.
Regardless of when you start, it's a Q1 for you in that role.
Yeah. Do you have the same, Oscar? Is that how you do it? Do you chunk it, or
when I join, I normally never build out anything beyond the first year because things change so dramatically and your risk landscape changes, your appetite potentially changes. So I like to just kind of build out that kind of first year view after going through all that due diligence from a framework, risk, conversation point of view, and kind of set that out and kind of alignments to those business objectives, as I said as well, because beyond that, it's really difficult. The goalposts change constantly. I don't know, Naveed, about your experience in other businesses, but from my experience, the goalposts change constantly. So it's difficult to really plan beyond that, at least initially.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. As I said, everyone wants a 3-year plan, and I always struggle. So I've negotiated down to a year. And often what you find is there's stuff that, and as you stay longer in a tenure, you get to know kind of there's some BAU things, right? There are constants you're going to have to do, but things which are facing back into the business, supporting the business, doing things, that's always, it's completely up in the air. And sometimes it changes quarter by quarter, and you just have to build that flexibility in. But again, depends on the mindset of the organization. Some have better plans. At the startup scale-up organization I joined 3 years ago, we didn't. So as such, it was always very, very, very agile, put it that way. Whereas Currys, for example, had more distinct, in a year, this is what we want to do. But to your point, I don't like building. Even in the security world, things change so rapidly that if you can be made to look silly if you kind of go, put your stake in the ground, here's a 3-year plan, I'm not going to budge because you're going to have to change. So why basically make a rod for your own back?
Yeah. Knee-jerking sometimes is not great, especially when you're trying to get that confidence from the board and exec on your strategy, really.
Absolutely. So I suppose realistically for you guys, it's the number one is really truly understand the business. Knowing what makes it tick, knowing what makes the money, and then really sort of understanding the perimeter side. And you touched on it about Naveed. I think you said it exactly. But don't disrupt before you know what you can do or what you need to do or anything like that. Just assess everything. And both of you have said it really. Just assess everything before doing anything. Because you can't fix everything. You can't fix everything definitely in 12 months, so never mind 90 days. So it's all about assessing the landscape realistically for CISOs going in and then really sort of working with all the stakeholders and making sure that they're on your side as much as possible realistically and building those relationships and really sort of going from there for the first 90 days and understanding the key risks and the low-hanging fruit, which I know you touched on, Oscar. But I think that's where it goes. Is there anything else that sort of moves? I
think also the team as well is an important fact, right, as well, because you need to be able to rely on your team. I'm definitely culpable of trying to get my hands involved with things, maybe when I shouldn't. And I think it comes with experience that you need to be able to rely on your team to deliver for you. So now what I try to do is kind of set those objectives and I let the team kind of define how they get there. I don't like to dictate how to do their job. I mean, they're clever people, smarter than me in these areas. So I think that's important because sometimes you can get too bogged down with the details of things. You want to be able to really rely on that team, build a strong team that can deliver really, and that you trust.
Absolutely. Actually, you stole the words from me. I was actually just going to mention the team, right? There's a lot of what we talked about was fixing risks for the business, but one of the things you need to understand is depending on what type of situation you come in, you're either going to inherit a team or you have to build a team, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I mentioned around how to learn some of the business processes. How do you do recruitment, for example? So I had to build a team here. Currys, there was a team I inherited. In both instances, you kind of look at it, especially in the 90-day scenario, you come in and kind of go, my mindset often is, if I come into a role, unless it's a mature organization, mature team who's been there before, for example, that we probably need to be more on the side of, what do we call it, detect and response type capabilities, because the proactive security probably doesn't exist as much. Yeah. So it's that in the sense where I joined, we didn't have much in the sense of security because, again, it was a newish type thing. I very much went in and kind of gone, I need some kind of SOC type capability. And I very much got into basically and I didn't have an internal team, so I'm going to outsource it so that I have at least that capability of being able to monitor and respond to things, because we know the proactive side isn't there. But conversely, as Oscar said, if there's a mature team already in place or a team in place, just basically speaking to them, understanding how they work, etc., and just almost relying on them to continue working the way they are. While, as I said, if you go into a team, don't disrupt the business, don't disrupt the team. Because the last thing you can do is basically, it's just like any team, right? You can take a sports analogy, you can do any team. If you go in and start making waves day one, that's going to disrupt them as well. So rely on them, continue letting them do what they're doing, and observe the team as well as the business to kind of go, is this the right fit? And then based on that knowledge, 90 days, 100 days later, start tweaking. I've done both. I basically had a team, observed, and kind of go, how do we basically make this better from my perspective, versus I had to build one from scratch. And at that point, kind of go, which order am I going to build it in? At least have those ideas. You're not going to recruit them in the first 90 days. You probably won't, with notice periods, search issues, etc. But start articulating, because like CFO will want to know, what does your team look like, Naveed? Yeah. So you can't go, in my head, this is what I'm thinking of. But again, I'm trying to understand the business to be able to make sure I basically optimize the recruitment process. It's things like that you have to be thinking about, rather than kind of just go, I don't know, oh, I'm going to fix everything. Because as Oscar said, we can't, security people are really bad for this, because we see a problem, go, that's the biggest issue. Yeah. Often it's not the biggest issue. It's just one of the hundreds of them. It's being able to step back and basically look at it holistically is the key here.
Nice. Yeah. Cheers, guys. I think leads me on to my final question. What's your one big piece of advice for either future CISOs or even current CISOs going into their next role? Have you got any key tips or key advice for them?
You want to take that, Oscar, first?
Yeah, sure. I've probably got just two or three bits. I think if to take away from this, if anything, I think don't be the voice of doom and gloom in a boardroom. That's never went down well for me in the past. I think focus on what you're trying to do and aligning it to that business strategy is absolutely key. As I've said, there will be times you need to deliver bad news, but make sure you deliver it in a way that comes with those solutions, because you want to be able to identify risk, but also treat it if it's in your ability to do so. And you'll be respected a lot more and trusted, I think, if you come with that kind of mindset. So make sure you make those risk-based decisions at all costs. Allow the board to be involved in those decisions as well. You're not making those decisions on your own around whether you do or don't do something. So you're kind of asking yourself questions like, does the plan work, address a major risk? Does it align with the business objectives? And is there something more important you could be doing than that one thing? And then just finally, the last point for me is more of a mindset point that I like to take in, is kind of be curious, not furious. You'll ask better questions and you'll understand why somebody's doing something, and come up with a kind of solution that works for you and the individual. So
funny enough, when I joined Dojo, that was exactly the phrase someone said to me: be curious rather than furious. Interesting. For me, there's any aspirational CISOs kind of have to step back and go, what is it that they actually want to do? Because again, in my head, a true CISO role is the executive role. It's not a doing role. It's very much a strategic business alignment, team management, but you're almost an advocate for security to the business, but the business to the security, if that makes sense. Because there's been times I've had to explain to a security team why we're not doing something or why we're going to slow down, because I'm almost advocating for the business. So you're almost in that middle ground. But what is a true CISO role? An executive role is not usually a doing role. So if you enjoy doing, then probably a CISO role is not going to be for you. That's number one. The other one is, as I said, an interview process we touched upon at the start. It's a two-way conversation. Maybe for more junior roles, whereby you get hammered by technical questions and various type of what's it called, psychometric tests, whatnot, to see if you're the right fit. For a CISO role, the company has to fit you as well. So your call comes down to, as I said, not just reporting lines, but the other stakeholders who you can be facing off to. Just getting a feel for, is this the right type of company for me? As I said, I like doing reading public accounts if I can. things like that. Just kind of go, what are they saying in their public reports? Are they even mentioning cybersecurity? Have any of the board members got cyber experience, etc., etc.? And then when you land, I've touched upon this as well, Jess. So be curious, not furious. Truly understand how the business makes money, how the processes work. And absolutely, as Oscar touched on the nail on the head, which I've learned painfully, is don't just bring problems. Because so you need to learn to do horse trading outside of the boardroom, the risk committees, the audit committees, right, with the relevant stakeholders. So if you need the CIO to do something, you're going to have multiple discussions with the CIO to come to an agreement. So when you both turn up to risk committee, or one of you turns up risk committee, it's a problem and a solution. Because if you just go in with a problem, at that point, the senior people look around kind of go, he doesn't actually know how to solve it. Even if it's not yours to solve, by the way, and this way is interesting. The deliverer of the bad news becomes the owner of the bad news and fixer of bad news. So you need to be able to go in, this is the problem, X, Y, and Z, articulate it in the business terms, and already agreed with X, Y, and Z that we're going to basically fix it, and by Q3, for argument's sake, we're going to be working on it. At that point, you come across as an executive that you basically have got the skill sets to negotiate, rather than just, they're almost a consultant, right? Because this is one of the reasons I left consultancy, because you see all the problems, you put reports in front of clients, go, here's all your problems, and then walk away. That's not what they're looking to do when they hire a CISO.
Thank you, guys. I'm just laughing at that instance. Yeah.
Sorry, it's not an insult. I was a consultant for 16 years, so I'll own this one.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. That's all realistically for today. Thank you, Naveed. Thank you, Oscar. It's been brilliant. Obviously, just giving me a good insight in terms of what it looks like for you, what it should look like, the do's and don'ts and everything like that. So, again, thank you guys for joining me. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope the listeners did as well and do. Thanks again, guys.
Yeah, thanks, James.
Massive thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Cyber Trusted Tech Talks podcast with me, Jake Adshead, and guests Naveed Islam and Oscar Neill. If you have any follow-up questions, please reach out to myself or Oscar or Naveed, and don't forget to subscribe to our LinkedIn, Spotify and YouTube channels so you don't miss any future events, podcasts, webinars or panel talks in the future.